Root crowns and roots. The root crown is also known as the root flare or root collar. That is where the bottom of the trunk joins the tops of the roots. So in the description below, you can see some pictures very clearly where the roots stop, the roots look very different from the trunk, and you can see the difference there. So take a look at those pictures. And conversely, you could think of it as the part of a root system from which the stem grows. So natural trees in the forest usually grow from seeds and do not have root crown problems. But transplanted trees could be placed too deep into the soil, and the healthy root flare does not develop at the surface. As a result, trees can begin to decline soon after planting, or maybe years later, if we're not careful about how we plant our tree with the root crown above ground. Because roots and trunks have different purposes, and the root flare is the part of the tree where it transforms from tree trunk out to roots. This section can affect the tree's development as it controls the up and down flow of water and nutrients. So when planting your trees, make sure the root crown is visible above the soil level. Here are the root crown and roots flaring out from this old oak tree, from this old citrus tree, and from this old olive tree. So buried root crowns may be affected by root crown rot and root crown weevils and can kill the tree. So let's make sure we pay attention to the root crown and place it above ground when planting a tree. If you live in a frosty, snowy area, you may need to place mulch around the root crown during the winter and then remove it when the danger of frost is past, at least when the tree is young. The root crown area usually appears swollen, tapered, constricted, or very thin, as well as a combination of these, and can be vaguely or clearly apparent just above the roots. In our thick clay soil, we are better off planting the trunk and root crowns well above the ground and placing the roots into the soil. Potted trees may sometimes come with buried root crowns. When you're taking the pot off of the tree, you may need to remove several inches of soil in the nursery pot just to expose the root crown. That's because maybe more soil was dumped onto the plant as it was growing in the pot. But you need to be in charge of finding the root crown and making sure that the root crown is above ground where it can breathe. So before you plant, excavate the trunk, locate the crown, and place the tree in the ground so that the root flare is just above grade and the roots are radiating in all directions. Don't surround a tree with a raised garden bed of soil. Although it may look very nice, it won't be so lovely when the tree gets sick. It may take a while for a large tree to react, but by the time you notice the dieback, fungus, or discoloration, it may be too late. If you see an existing root crown buried in, you can do your best to uncover it by removing mulch and soil around it. In summary, never plant low, especially in a soil that has a heavy clay content. Here's an easy way to remember when planting trees. Plant high, it will thrive. Plant low, it won't grow. Even the tree's roots need oxygen to develop, and upper soil layers have more oxygen than lower layers. We mimic what happens naturally in a forest when a seed sprouts by planting trees at the correct depth. Okay, now accommodating the root structure into your soil, make the hole wide and deep enough to accommodate the sprawling roots. Potted tree roots are often wrapped around in circles due to being inside of a pot. Gently tease the roots out of the soil, freeing them so they can grow in all directions. Tease out the roots with your fingers gently, combing through the tangles, or use a water hose to spray some of the soil out of the root ball, and then gently pull the roots into an outward growing direction so they can grow out away from the tree. Next, pull out the individual strands one by one. If you break some of them, it's usually not a problem, but try to leave as much of its roots as you can. Splay out the roots from the tree and place them in the hole and cover them with soil to hold them in place. Next, place the long roots shooting out in all directions in your planting hole and slowly work around the tree, covering the roots back with the soil you took out and making sure to leave the root crown showing above ground. Bring the soil up over the roots to about 1 inch below the root crown. Don't put the tree in a pit. Make sure the root crown can breathe and the roots are growing out in all directions. And this is a method of tree planting that I like to use. I call it the rose petal method of adding more air pockets to the heavy clay soil around the trees. So around the central hole and several inches away from the outside edge of the hole, insert a round nose shovel or a garden fork into the soil and rock it back and forth a couple of times to break up the ground and allow water to penetrate the soil around the newly planted roots. Go around the hole, inserting the shovel to complete 2 revolutions. From above, it looks like a rose with petals opening out. And so you can cover the planting hole with mulch, tamp it lightly with your feet, then lightly water in the newly planted tree. You don't want to drown it with water, but you want it to be plenty moist. Because the tree roots will be closer to the surface in a wide, shallow planting hole, water won't have to penetrate the soil as deeply to reach the tree's roots, which is saving water. Okay, next, insert watering pipes in the ground in the tree's root zone. This is one that we came up with here in Southern California because we do tend to have problems with drought. And before we installed our watering pipes, we could water for an hour on top of the soil and it would not penetrate deeply into the root zone. It would stay like in the top inch or so. So we found this method to be a tremendous improvement. We can fill a watering pipe to overflowing a few times and we have deep water penetration of the root zone. So the way you do it is you take a 2 to 3 foot long piece of ABS or PVC or another kind of pipe, copper pipe even, with a 2 to 3 inch diameter. And you place that pipe in the root zone of your tree, leaving about 3 inches of pipe sticking up above the soil level. Now you have a watering pipe that allows you to directly water into the opening with a hose, and the water will go right down to the roots. So this is a great way to water deeply without using a lot of water. And plant the new tree in your native soil. Now this one may come as a surprise to some of us. It certainly did to me when I first learned about it. Because long ago I worked at a garden center where we taught our customers to put a variety of soil amendments into a planting hole to help the new plant get started. Although the garden store sells many planting hole amendments, by giving this advice, adding amendments can cause permanent problems. I added lava and organic materials to our heavy clay soil holes when we planted our first batch of trees in 2012. Unfortunately, 2 expensive grafted avocado trees never thrived. Then they died when their stems turned black due to lack of oxygen. And a nectarine tree I planted is still alive, but it fights fungus every year, and it appears to have sunken down into the soil over time. So what happened was when I added the amendments into that soil, into the hole, it was like creating sort of like a potted little area with different soil. And as that soil shrunk down, the tree shrunk down too, and the root crown ended up lower than the soil level. So I did create a channel, like a little stream bed, to help the tree drain, but it has never been that happy. So I'm happy to be able to share these tips with you before the same thing happens to you. So as the amendments, if you put amendments in the planting hole, as they decompose, they consume oxygen and they shrink, so the tree sinks down deeper. Recently, I read a report from Linda Chalker-Scott, a PhD teacher at the Extension of Horticulturist and Associate Professor at Puyallup Research and Extension Center in Washington State University. She found no benefit to amending the soil, and even worse, it is detrimental to the health of the trees in the long run. The study compared trees planted with no soil amendments to trees planted with soil amendments. The trees without any soil amendment did better. The problems are that the amendments will decompose and sink the tree, and the roots will grow around in circles in the amended hole rather than branch out into the native soil. And also the wise gardener, Paul Gauci, who's the star of the Back to Eden film, agrees. He says that trees might as well get used to the soil they will be living in right from the start. So once again, Mother Nature knows best. Imagine this. You dig a hole in clay soil and fill it with potting soil and various amendments, forming a pocket of fluffy soil in the clay. The tree you plant in that pocket prefers to grow in that pit of potting soil rather than penetrate out into the native soil around it. In the summer heat, the pocket of fluffy soil will dry faster than the native soil, so you'll have to remember to water that pocket or the plant will wither. The amended soil pit will fill up and hold rainwater like a bathtub in the rainy season. So here's an excerpt from the university's report. It says, quote, "No scientific studies to date show any measurable benefit of soil amendment except in containerized plant production. Plants grown in native soil consistently showed better root establishment and more vigorous growth. Only one study reported no negative effects of amending soil with organic matter, but there were no benefits either. When you consider the cost of materials and labor needed to incorporate soil amendments, it's difficult to justify the practice. Nevertheless, this outdated practice is still required in the specifications of architects, landscapers, and other groups associated with landscape installation. In addition, it is still recommended by garden centers and gardening articles. And there is a multi-million-dollar soil amendment industry that has little interest in debunking this myth. As responsible green industry professionals, we need to recognize and avoid non-sustainable management practices. Bottom line, select suitable plant species for site conditions. Don't be an enabler. In other words, use native soils for backfill without amendment. In extreme cases, replace the entire planting site with topsoil and mulch landscapes well with wood chips or another water-holding material. And that's the end of that quote from Linda Chalker Scott, PhD, from her paper that I found It's called The Myth of Soil Amendments, Washington State University. And there's a link to read this PDF below in the description. So this practice will also save a lot of time, money, and effort. Hooray for nature! And then we're going to talk a little bit about you have a water table underground. As trees become established in the soil, the roots will eventually grow downwards to the water table. The water table is a level underground where groundwater saturates the soil. If you've ever dug a hole on a sandy beach, you'll have a pool of water once you dig deep enough. Water tables like that are also in our soil, but usually deeper down. And that's where roots can get water even in the summertime. Water table levels can vary depending on how much rain the soil has received. In the summertime, when the surface dries out from sunlight shining on the soil surface, the tree's roots will head deeper into the earth to find water. This process strengthens the tree to endure dry weather, and eventually, as the tree becomes established, it won't need to be hand watered anymore. And here's a fun idea. You can create mulch-filled holes in the soil, placed strategically to catch and direct sprinkler water into the ground in summertime. Okay, and we will be talking a lot more about conserving water in step 6.